The most powerful Kyber crystal in the galaxy is nothing what you would expect it to be. Within the history of the Jedi and Sith, very few objects are quite as significant as that of the Kyber crystals. Innately connected to the Force, they used lightsabers within alchemical experiments, and even super weapons. It's difficult to see the development of their respective orders without these gems being a part of it. But what may be the most powerful of all of these minerals is not the kind of Kyber that is found in lightsabers. It is spelled K-Y-B-E-R, but a singular, distinct Kyber crystal, the spelling being K-A-I-B-U-R-R, as confusing as it may be, will actually become very clear at the end of this holocron. In today's holocron, we are going to be talking about the very first Kyber crystal, which would have been the most powerful in the entire galaxy. Crystal lore is something of our favorites to get into here at the archives, so today's dive will be quite special, since we're finally talking about the crystal that began it all. But before we switch our headlamps on and plumb deep into the mines, the crystals whisper to us that a few strangers are among our midst. Some of you joining us have not yet subscribed, so if you find yourself in a thirst for knowledge about the galaxy far, far away, be sure to reach out with the Force and crush that subscribe button to become notified when we upload every single day, nearly. So now, Acolytes, let us begin. In Legends, the Kyber crystal first appeared on the planet of Carpus 5, also known as Mimban, in the possession of an ancient race. The cultists on the world devoted themselves entirely to their god by the name of Pomo Gemma. They seem to have believed that their god created this crystal due to its powerful healing capabilities. This was one of the foremost powers of the Kyber, its uncanny ability to heal beings back from the very brink of death. The ancient Mimbanites of the world used the crystal to tap into the Force and to heal all sorts of injuries and ailments that afflicted their people. They kept the large crystal within a temple to their minor god, resting within the chest of its statue. But as the eons wore on, this ancient race died out by unknown means, and the temple became overgrown and forgotten. Though at some point, shards of the Kyber had been carved from the main crystal, only a few of these shards, known as splinters, could actually be found in the galaxy. And according to Luke Skywalker, these splinters were able to create the most powerful type of lightsaber possible. Each splinter held an equivalent fraction of the main crystal's power, and they had amazing properties. They increased one's perception of the Force, magnifying, clarifying it several times over in proportion to the splinter's size. Anytime a Force sensitive came into contact with a shard or the main Kyber crystal, they would glow brightly and hum within the Force itself. And this is all due to the insane abilities of the Kyber. The amazing healing capabilities only scratched the surface. The main crystal itself had the ability to magnify one's power in the Force almost 1,000 times over. Even splinters had this ability in proportion to their size and density. The powers of the Kyber were so potent that they could enable Force users to temporarily gain access to abilities that shouldn't be physically possible. Case in point, when Darth Vader got his hands on the crystal. Vader was then able to actually manifest Force lightning. This is despite his suit's metal and technology making this typically impossible for him to do successfully. But for just a moment, while in contact with the crystal, Vader was essentially able to access what would have been his power without the suit. He was able to instinctively create a ball of Force lightning that he summoned and launched it as a terrifyingly powerful projectile. This ability would later get a name in the lore known as kinetite. However, the crystal came with a couple important drawbacks that we have to note. Although it was insanely strong in the Force, it did have some adverse effects of those who were not sufficiently powerful to wield it. When Vader interacted with the crystal, his strength in the Force was increased so much that he lost control of himself. Even though he had wanted to capture Luke and Leia alive, he ended up attacking them with lethal intent. Once Luke managed to get the crystal away from Vader though, he was able to heal both himself and Leia from the brink of certain death. It also seems that the Kyber empowers all Force sensitives within its vicinity as well, and not just the one in direct contact with it. This seems to be the case when Luke was shown to actually fight Vader despite being only a post-Yavin version. By all accounts, Luke at this point in the timeline should have been completely incinerated by Vader, but the aura exuding from the crystal was so potent that not only was it able to increase his own power, but also the ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi, as Kenobi was able to hold Vader back through Luke's body, essentially empowering the young boy with skills of a Jedi Master temporarily. Using this, Luke was able to deflect Vader's lightning and sever his right arm, causing him to fall deep within a pit. I almost like to think of this moment as the ultimate version of Obi-Wan battling the ultimate version of Vader. I know those stats aren't exactly accurate, but it's an interesting thought to entertain. Anyway, Lord Vader had likely desired the crystal as a means to overthrow Sidious. After all, it could basically restore him back to an unsuited state if he had it with him. However, the trade-offs was that it eroded and overshadowed his own willpower. Vader is the kind of Sith that believes overwhelming power is useless if it cannot be controlled. So once he climbed his way out of the pit, he decided that he would just leave the crystal there. But of course, this was probably the best anyway due to the second drawback of the crystal, which is far more glaring of an issue. The Kyber's potency in the Force was directly affected by its proximity to the temple. The very temple of Pomojema. The main crystal and all of its splinters would progressively get weaker and weaker the further one took it away from the temple. And it was basically powerless once it was taken off of the world of Minban. It was only made extremely dangerous yet again when it was introduced into lightsaber construction, as its properties as a focusing crystal were still quite powerful and potent. Once Luke Skywalker learned this, he decided that he would take the Kyber with him so that it would stay out of evil hands forever. By now, the Empire had already figured out the location of the Temple of Pomojema, and they could still do something terrible if they could find the Kyber and weaponize it. Luke would actually keep the crystal with him long after he started the Jedi Order and the Jedi Praxium, wherein he would use the Kyber crystal as a teaching tool. Vader did end up keeping one splinter for himself though, which was essentially passed on to Lady Lumaya, who used it in the construction of her light whip. An interesting bit of Legends lore there. This staggeringly powerful relic comes to us from the classic Legends novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Now when we say this crystal was the very first Kyber, we didn't mean in lore. Out of universe, the crystal holds an extremely special place in Star Wars history. This is the very first time that the name Kyber has ever been mentioned. The Kyber was going to be the centerpiece of the original Star Wars story draft by Lucas though. In the Star Wars, The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, the Kyber crystal was essentially going to be the singular gateway to the Force itself. In order to actually tap into the Force, one had to interact with the crystal first. Ben Kenobi would have told this to Luke, kicking off a race to the crystal against Darth Vader. Lucas would end up revising this, as he wanted the Force to be something that was free to access by anybody without the necessity of the crystal. He would end up changing the Kyber's importance in the third draft, making it a special crystal once belonging to Obi-Wan. As the story played out, Obi-Wan lost the crystal during the Battle of Kondon, the same battle in the original draft where Luke's father would have died. It was said that the crystal was then taken to the crystal chamber on Alderaan. The idea for the entire crystal was ultimately scrapped by Lucas though, who decided that he wanted the story to revolve more around Luke and Vader's relationship, and he believed that the crystal was beginning to overshadow that. The name would be passed down throughout several ideas over the years though, until it landed as the official name of the crystals used in lightsabers. Kyber crystals were officially born into the lore. However, as we now know, the powerful Kyber crystal and the story associated with it was retooled and released in the novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Another fact is that the story was originally going to be the sequel to A New Hope. Alan Dean Foster was brought in during the filming of the first Star Wars and was asked to write a good sequel to it and write it in such a way that it could be filmed on a lower budget. However, after the massive success of Star Wars, Lucas decided to go with a bigger budget story in the form of Empire Strikes Back. He still had Alan Foster release Splinter as a novel though, and the story fits quite comfortably in between Hope and Empire, and works quite naturally in the timeline. This book holds a special place for me because it was actually one of the very first Legends novels I ever read, and I was extremely excited to revisit the story and the power of the Kyber. If you would all be interested in a full breakdown of Splinter of the Mind's Eye though, from start to finish, be sure to comment it down below, and we can break down the original sequel to Star Wars. But as always guys, thank you so much for joining us in yet another Holocron upload. We deeply enjoy finding more stories and aspects of the lore to bring to you, so be sure to comment what other topics you would like us to research. But until next time, may the Force be with you, and have a wonderful day.